All right, what is up, everybody? So we're back here on the Conquer Athlete YouTube channel. And with this one, I'm going to talk about developing strength endurance, what it is, why it matters, and how I use it for my athletes throughout the year. So building or developing strength endurance is a very important topic because a lot of athletes think that strength endurance is just about doing more reps, getting tired and then trying to hold on. But if you really want to understand it, strength endurance becomes one of the most powerful tools you have to improve performance with inside mixed modal sports. At its core, strength endurance is the ability to sustain force output repeatedly for a prolonged period of time under fatigue. It's not just, are you strong? It's, can you keep expressing strength when your breathing is elevated, when local muscular fatigue starts to build, and when the workout is demanding and you have to hold positions and keep moving well. That's where it really matters. So a lot of athletes can show strength in isolation, right? We know this. They can hit a heavy lift. They can move a big number when they're fresh. But with inside mixed modal sports, that can come in handy during max effort attempts. But that might be, 5% of the total workouts at an event. We want to take those same athletes in a workout and ask them to front squat after a machine or cycle moderate to heavy thrusters deep into a workout piece, or hold on to a barbell while maintaining proper mechanics late in an event to preserve energy and not have energy leakage, right? And that's where you can start seeing the gap between raw strength and then usable strength within inside mixed modal sports. And that's really what strength endurance is about. It's about making your strength more usable. In mixed modal sports, that matters because very rarely are you expressing strength in a perfect, fresh environment. Like I said, yes, they're going to have max effort attempts with inside certain competition events, but some competitions don't even have max effort lifts, right? Most of the time, strength has to be expressed under some level of interference. That interference could be breathing demand. It could be local muscular fatigue. It could be grip fatigue. It could be core fatigue. It could be with inside transitions as pace changes, or just accumulated fatigue of training and competition. When we talk about building strength endurance, what we're really trying to do is improve the athlete's ability to maintain positions, maintain output, and maintain movement quality as fatigue rises. That's the huge separator, because an athlete who can stay mechanically sound, who can keep producing force, and who does not completely fall apart when discomfort shows up, that's the athlete that becomes much more dangerous in a competition, especially as that competition keeps going longer and longer. Now, one thing I want to make clear is that strength endurance is not random stuff. It's not just about doing high reps because high reps are hard. It has to be developed with intention. So for me, with athletes that I work with, strength endurance usually sits in a space where I'm trying to blend force production and fatigue resistance. That could look like moderate loads for repeated efforts. It could look like longer time under tension. It could look like density work where the athlete has to repeat efforts with incomplete rest. And it could look like positional work where they're forced to own key mechanics under accumulating fatigue. The part is that the athlete is not surviving reps. They are learning to sustain quality force output. The distinction matters a lot because if the movement completely falls apart, if positions disappear, if the athlete is just doing ugly reps to say they got the work done, that's not really the adaptation I want with them. I want them to be challenged, absolutely, but I also want them to be developing better tolerance to fatigue while still respecting the movement, right? And to me, that's where really good coaching comes in. Now, why is strength endurance so important? Okay, well, first, because it helps bridge the gap between raw strength and then competition expression. You can be incredibly strong, but if you cannot cycle submaximal loads, if you cannot repeat effort, and if you cannot support positions under fatigue, then a lot of strength is never going to really show up when it matters most within inside of a competition. And strength endurance improves repeatability, especially with inside mixed modal sports where repeatability is everything, right? One big set or one great round doesn't matter. It's not going to get you higher in a leaderboard or closer to the podium. Strength endurance helps athletes hold on to a higher percentage of their strength across repeated bouts. And that's massive for workouts with cycling, out of object work, carries, wall balls, lunging, front rack work, etc. And it builds confidence, right? So thirdly, improving strength endurance with athletes is going to build their confidence. So when athletes know they can keep moving a barbell, they know they can maintain proper shapes and positions, they know they can maintain proper mechanics under fatigue, they're going to compete differently. So let's talk about how I use this with athletes and how it changes throughout the year. Early in the year, or more in the general phases, accumulation phase, I'm not really trying to make strength endurance look specific to competition. I'm more focused on building the foundation of it. That means I'm going to use tempos, longer sets, pauses, positional work, accessory training to improve tissue tolerance, positional awareness, and basic muscular stamina. This is where I want the athlete to own the movement, build control, and create the structural base that later allows them to tolerate more demanding work. So in those phases, strength endurance may not look flashy. It might be a split squats with tempo, it might be front rack holds, might be repeated submaximal squatting with controlled eccentrics. It might be various cluster sets and wave loads, carries, longer accessory circuits, density circuits. The goal there is to create the qualities that will later support more of the sport-specific expression. Now, as we move a little deeper in the year, I start blending strength endurance more directly with the competitive demands of the athlete. Now we may move into repeated barbell cycling at moderate percentages. I may pair front squats or thrusters with cyclical work. I may create intervals where the athlete has to sustain strength output under rising breathing demands. And we might implement more EMOMs, interval formats, or density work where the athlete has to manage rest, output, and mechanics. So this is where it's going to start looking a little bit more like sport. The athlete still needs to be challenged locally, but now they're learning to express that under more realistic stress. For example, I might have the athlete doing repeated front squat exposure with machine work or cyclical moderate thrusters inside interval pieces, or holding barbell consistency across multiple rounds where the rest is incomplete and the trunk is starting to get more taxed. So that strength endurance is going to be much more specific to the environment. Then as we get closer to competitive season, I want strength endurance to be even more aligned with how it's going to show up on the floor. So I'm looking at things like, can they sustain front rack integrity late in a workout? Can they keep cycling a barbell when the heart rate gets really high? Can they hold positions under specific complementary fatigue factors? Can they repeat submaximal strength demands across multiple rounds, events, or days? So at this point, strength endurance becomes less about general development and more about competition expression. So this is where you'll see workouts or interval pieces that create interference intentionally. Maybe a machine to run in the thrusters, core fatigue in the front squats, repeated intervals with short rests where the athlete has to hold on to aggressive cycling. So now I want to know not just whether they have the capacity, but whether they can use it when the environment becomes chaotic and uncomfortable, right? And that's a huge part of the success for developing strength endurance for mixed modal sports, because the way strength endurance shows up in the off season should not be the same way it shows up right before competition. So you're building it, you're integrating it, and then you're testing and expressing it, right? And that progress matters. I also think that's important to understand that not every athlete needs the same dose of strength endurance work, right? Some athletes are naturally very strong, but they lose too much when fatigue rises. Those athletes will usually need more work around repeatability, density, and sustaining positions. Other athletes already have decent muscular endurance, but they don't have enough strength to make the endurance useful. For them, they need to prove their max strength first, right? And that's a big point. If the athlete's absolute strength is too low, then even moderate loads become highly fatiguing. So sometimes the fastest way to improve strength endurance is actually to improve their raw strength first. So always think about absolute strength, absolute speed continuum that we talk about. On the flip side, if the athlete is very strong but cannot hold repeated efforts, now we need to bring more attention to cycling, stamina, density, tolerance, and recoverability between bouts. So again, this comes back to the individual design. You have to know what is limiting the athlete. Now, where does this go wrong? That's something I always like to talk about in these videos. Usually one of two places. One, the coach makes it too random and it just turns into fatigue for the sake of fatigue, right? Which we talk about a lot. Or two, they use too much of it for too long, right? So strength endurance is a potent tool, but it's also very fatiguing. It can create a lot of local muscular fatigue, a lot of systemic fatigue. If you're not careful, it can interfere with strength development, power output, and overall recovery. So you have to place it well. You need to know when it belongs, how much the athlete can recover from, and what is needed to drive the adaptation. So for me, that's always a question, right? What adaptation am I chasing here? Does this fit into the bigger picture of this season? If I can answer that clearly, strength endurance becomes a great tool. If I cannot, then it usually turns into just jump fatigue, right? So to wrap this up, strength endurance is not just about doing more reps. It's about improving the athlete's ability to sustain force, hold positions, and keep expressing strength under fatigue. It matters because mixed modal sport demands usable strength, not just isolated strength. And how you train it should change depending on the season, the athlete, and the goal. So you always want to build a phase, you want to integrate it, and then closer to competition, you want to make it feel like sport, right? And that's really how I use it with my athletes. Now, when it's done well, it can be one of the things that really separates athletes who are just strong from athletes who can actually use your strength when it matters most. Hope you found this video useful. I'll see you guys in the next one.